Your children and your grandchildren are being taught a lot of stuff, okay? And what they are being taught basically is to how do I say this? Not believe everything you say, and not believe everything that God says. Okay? Mm-hmm. Because if I can, if you teach your children about God, about Bible, and basically say, okay, the Bible is right, it is correct. And these people will pick apart and say, well, hold on a minute, let me show you something that you've been taught that is incorrect. Okay? And if I can get you to believe that that part of the Bible is a contradiction, then if one thing in there is a contradiction, why isn't it all of it a contradiction? And if it all is a contradiction, then evidently what your parents told you was not correct. Also, therefore, if it is a contradiction confined in the Bible, then basically what will happen is this, that it will tell them, okay, if that's a contradiction, then how do you know that God is true? Because this and this doesn't match. And so therefore they get them to disbelieve in God. And this is why I've shared with you that based upon current population and the current way that the church is going, by the time your children, which are already now in this generation, those children which were born in roughly the baby boomers were up until like 63, I think it was. And so the next generation was born in 1964 to about 1980, I think was that time. Roughly about 40% of them are in church. Okay? From 1980 to 2000, it has dropped from 40% down to 25%. From the year 2000 to roughly, they're saying right around 2000 to maybe about 2010, I believe it is already somewhere down to close to 10%. Okay? The next generation, which are those that are being born from 2011, probably to about 2020 to maybe 2025, that generation, by the time they get 18, probably about 4% of them will be in church. And what you're seeing is a great falling away. And those of you that are my age and stuff, which most of you are in close proximity, and I don't think there's anybody under 40, right? Are you under 40?
I am 40.
You are 40? Okay.
You just got it.
And then you just got it.
Barely made it.
Okay. Basically, from about 40 on, okay, which was born in roughly about 1970s. If you were to talk about the population or the attendance in the church today, as it was if you were going in the 1970s and 80s, mid 80s to late 80s, you would say that the population in the church has greatly decreased immensely. There are so many activities and other things, but there's also the movement afoot to basically disbelieve the Bible. And therefore, if we can get that underlayment and everything. For instance, we've shared with you, the Bible says that He created, He created them, male and female, right? Okay? So if a person says, well, hold on a minute, when God created me, He made a mistake because I'm no longer male, I have female tendencies. So therefore God made a mistake when He created me. And what you could do is people are believing this. And they're saying, okay, if God made a mistake, with you, how many other mistakes did he make? And so this begins to start handling. The definition of marriage is between a man and a woman. That is not my rules. And may I say this, that also is not the government's rules. Those are God's rules. A government does not define marriage. God has already defined a marriage. What the government is trying to do is redefine marriage. Okay? And my feeling is this, number one, if there are two people and they are females or males, and they are living together, and that is their lifestyle, I don't agree with it. It is sin. It should not occur. But if they are doing that, and for instance, and they've been together, and they want to tell them that they can have a power of attorney or rights to define medical care for that person that they've been living with for 20 or 30 years. If the government wants to define that they can have those rights, give them those rights. I don't care. Let them have it. I don't have to be married to somebody to have those definitions of those rights. So don't redefine marriage because you want to give people rights for certain things. Okay? But yet that's what they're doing. And they're doing it based upon this, well, I should have that same right and I should have that same right. Have those rights. I don't care. That has nothing to do with being married to somebody. It just basically says, this is my closest friend that I have, and I've told them everything like I was talking today. There are some people, guys and gals, and that never get married. And they will have close friends. If it's a female, she may have a female friend. That is a very close friend. That does not mean that they're married to each other. Okay? That means they are very close to each other, and they tell each other everything, and they share with each other because they don't have a husband, or a wife. So don't redefine it based upon that. But that's what they're doing. Okay? And so some of the things that we've been talking about, when you look at it in the whole thing, you look at it and say, this is really stupid. Why are they doing that? And we're going to show you a couple now. Okay? One is called sleeping in the temple. Okay? And what it is you remember there's a guy in the Bible in the Old Testament. He actually has two books that are written by him in 1st and 2nd Samuel. Okay? Now, Samuel was a real young boy. And there's some things here. And what happens is, in one of the verses, we're going to talk about it, it says that he was sleeping in the temple. But yet when you look at it and you go through the history, the temple was not written until long afterwards. And so some people will say, hold on a minute, how could he be sleeping in the temple when the temple wasn't even built then, until much later? So then what you got to do is you got to go back and look at the context of that scripture. And some of the words, again, in the translation is where lies the issues. Okay? So if you got your Bible, go with me to 1 Samuel chapter 3 and verse number 3. So I got it.
And I heard the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep.
Okay. All right. So, you got an NIV?
Yes.
Okay.
The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord where the ark of God was.
All right. And so, somebody got a New King James? Yeah. Okay, let me give you the New King James. Before the lamp of God went out in the tabernacle of the Lord where the ark of God was, and while Samuel was lying down. And so what happens here is when you go back and you look, and especially in some of these to understand where it's at, the New King James Version talks about, there is a word, and it's called hakal, Hekal. That is the Hebrew word that they use here. And Hekal, the definition of Hekal basically means a large building. Okay? And what happened was, when they translated this, they translated that statement from a large building to the temple. Okay? So herein lies part of the problem as to how they defined this. Okay? Now, so it says that this word was there, and it's used for the temple, but again, it's a large building. Okay? Now, what happened was that a lot of commentators will say that long before the temple was built, that they would translate this as being a sacred place. Okay? And so you have it as that. And so what ends up happening in this, you look at this then, where it says that, and it says, that ere the Lamb of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep. It gives the impression that what Samuel was doing was laying in a holy portion of this building. Okay, when it begins to talk about this, and so, and basically, what is the sacred portion of the tabernacle or the temple?
Where the ark of God was.
Yeah. So what was that called? What was the place in the temple called that where God, the Holy of Holies? That's where God was. So it gives the impression that what he did was he fell asleep in this holy place where God was, an holy portion of this building. So if you look at it and say, okay, it was the temple, then they're saying, okay, well, that's where they're getting it, because they start talking about this Holy of Holies. Okay. But what happened was, when you look at the New King James, it says, before the lamp of God went out in the tabernacle of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and while Samuel was laying down. It doesn't say that Samuel was laying down in this Holy of Holies. It just says, before the lamp of God went out. Now you got to understand, before the temple was even built, they had the Ark of the Covenant that they carried from place to place. Okay? And later on, when they built the temple, then they took the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant was then placed in the Holy of Holies. And this is where people start drawing this. Because sometimes when you say, okay, in this holy portion of this temple, and really what it should have been was of this building, but also remember that the Ark of the Covenant was always placed into a tent when they were going from place to place. It wasn't out in the opening. Okay? They would go, there were people, and there was so many rules with this, okay? The ark, let's just pretend that the ark was about the size of this table, okay? And what would happen is you would have bearers on the ark, on the ends, okay? As they were carrying the ark, there were certain things that were not allowed to happen. That ark was not allowed to touch the ground. Okay? So if one of the people that were carrying that ark got tired, someone had to come and take their place. They could not take it off their shoulder and let it touch the ground. Okay? They had to do the exchange while it was still in the air. The other thing too is they were not supposed to touch this ark. So if that thing went to fall, you better be bracing it up. Mm-hmm. Okay, because you're really not allowed to touch this. So they took this responsibility, not lightly, but very sacredly. And so there was a platform that basically what they would do is they would come in, they would set up the tent, put in the platform, and then bring the Ark of the Covenant in there. Okay? And then you would have the high priest would go into this place, okay, which was God. So what's happening here is that some people will tell you, oh, well, if you look at this verse, what it's saying is that Samuel fell asleep in the Holy of Holies in the temple. But how could he do that? Because the temple was not built while Samuel was alive. Solomon was the one that built the temple, okay? And Solomon came after Samuel. Had already died. So there's that one. So that gets rid of that. Now, let's go to math class. Okay. Got to go back a long, long way for this one. In math, there is a thing called pi. Okay, not chocolate or lemon or anything like a pumpkin. Okay,
Not the movie.
Not the movie. It's pi. Okay, and basically they have come up and they said that pi is it's a radius of the circle. It takes me a while, but something about the radius of a circle or diameter of a circle, and you understand that pi is 3.14 blah 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 blah. Just keeps repeating itself. Okay. But what you need to look is in the Bible, it speaks of this, and it gives a dimension. And some people will say, okay, well, it's incorrect. Go to 1 Kings chapter 7. In verse number 23. All right, somebody got it?
Yeah. Mine doesn't say pi though.
Huh?
Mine doesn't.
No, it won't say pi.
Oh, okay. He made the sea of cast metal, circular in shape, measuring 10 cubits from rim to rim and 5 cubits high. It took a line of 30 cubits to measure around it.
Okay. So when you look at this, and what you have is pi. It is the ratio of the circumference of the circle to the diameter of the circle. Okay, the diameter of the circle is from point A to point B. Okay, and then the circumference of the circle is totally around the circle. Okay, when you do this, well, when you measure the diameter of the circle, and in reference to the circumference of the circle, that's where you get pi. And pi, the number is, and I got it here, it's 3.14592653588793. Okay?
I started writing and started talking fast.
So, okay. So that is pi. But look at what it said here. It said that this circular thing measured in cubits from brim to brim, it was circular in form, 10 cubits. Okay? So from side to side, this thing was 10 cubits. And what was the circumference of it?
So 5 cubits high. Oh,
It was-
circumference.
And
30 cubits.
30 cubits, okay? So if I take 30 cubits and divide that by the diagonal, which he said was 10, then that comes out with 3. And some people will say, see, the Bible made an error. Okay? Because because they're saying that the circumference of this circle, the circular object, is 30. And from side to side is 10. But you also got to look at what he also says. The height of this thing is 5 feet. They're not talking about a circular thing. What do you get when you've got something that is 30 feet around, 10 feet across, and 5 feet high?
It's like a
Huh?
Sounds like little platforms.
You get what you basically get is a cylinder. Is what you're getting is a cylinder. The other aspect of it is you got to understand in the Bible, they don't give exact measurements. They round things off. They didn't say, Noah, I want you to build the ark 200.5 feet. Or Noah, I want you to build this 18.5 cubits. He said 18 cubits or 19 cubits. He didn't say 18.5. And so what you have a lot of times is in the Bible, when they start talking about some numbers, they don't give half of a number, you know, unless it's like half of a week or half of a year or something like that. You know, when you're talking about, 36 weeks or something like that, or 144 and half of that being 72 or something. They don't say, okay, measure that circle and it's exactly 10.2 feet. You know, I'm sorry, but Stanley wasn't around with tape measures back in that period of time. They didn't come along. And you have to understand that basically a cubit was from an elbow to your fingertips. Now, please understand that if we probably all stood here right now from our elbow to our fingertips and we were to say, okay, this is a cubit, we probably would have different cubits. Right?
Yeah, you got bigger arms.
Bigger mouth, too. But basically, what they determined was, in a rough estimate, from the elbow to the fingertips would be roughly 18 inches. And so when they would build something, they would say, build it so many cubits, or some, so many cubits, and it would be this long, okay? And so you're going to hear people that will debate you on this, saying that the Bible is wrong. Because the Bible is saying that is 30 feet in circumference and 10 feet in diameter. Cannot be. A circle, a perfect circle will never be that way. A perfect circle would have to be a little bit more than 30 inches in circumference if the diameter is 10 inches. Okay? Based upon this. Based upon this, to be pi, actually that circle would have to be 31.415926535897993 inches in order to be an absolute perfect circle. Okay? And this is what I'm saying. You're going to get people that are going to hit you with this kind of stuff. And they're going to say, well, hold on a minute. We got errors, that are going on. So when you begin to see this, for instance, if you were to have a physics test, and somebody was to say to you that you have a to compute, the circumference of this circle, which has a 3.14 blah 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 blah, and round it to the nearest foot, the correct answer would actually be 30 feet, not 31 feet. Okay? Because you would take the 3.1 and that would go to 3 instead of 3.14. So if you were getting rid of the decimals in that, and you were only dealing with whole numbers, and you would say, tell me what the circumference of the circle would be that has a 10 inch or a 10 foot diameter, and what would it be? You would say, okay, it has to be 30 feet. So again, understanding that in the Bible they rounded numbers off. They weren't specific about things. Again, they didn't have the precise measurements that we have today. And I mean, even honestly, a lot of times, remember long time ago, cars had odometers that were numbers that twirled. Remember? How far did the numbers go on that car before it turned over again?
5 nines and a 9.
They were 99,999.9 miles. And as soon as you hit 100,000 miles on that car, it went back to zero.
Yeah.
Right? So if you had a car and somebody, and let's say you bought a car right now, and somebody told you that they got you a 1957 Chevy that has 17,595 miles on it. How do you know that it's not 317,000 miles? You don't. Because you don't know how many times that odometer has turned over. You weren't there, you didn't watch it. Now somebody could tell you, well, I know this says 17,959 miles, but I think that it's really 117,000 miles. And you're thinking, okay, so how many times did they drive this and where did they go? Well, they took it cross country about 15 times. You know, and you're beginning to think, I think that this is probably a lie. You know, it may be a little bit more than 100 and some thousand, you know, depending. But even then, I mean, even like today, you look at the odometer on your cars. Okay, now we got a brand new car, and when I look at that brand new car tells me that I've got 20,142 miles. It doesn't tell me that I got 20,142.8 miles or 0.6 miles. It's keeping that internally, not showing me, you know. When I look at my little Honda Civic, it's got 280-some thousand miles. And it's true, it hasn't turned over 4 or 5 times yet, you know. But when it gets to 999,999, that thing's going to go to 1 million miles, okay? And at that point in time, when it turns over to be 1 mile, I can sell that car for low mileage because that's what the odometer says, right? Mm-hmm. I'll sell it to you then. if you believe that. All righty. So let's go into let's go to the New Testament, and let's get you some out of here. So let's just start in the book of Matthew. And some people say that Matthew has some basic math problems that things just don't exactly read up. Huh?
His child for things not that quite acting up right, being a tax collector to his benefit.
But let's go into Matthew in the very beginning. I think it's actually Matthew chapter 1. And what you'll find in here is that where's it at? Matthew chapter 1, verse number 17. Okay, so somebody want to read?
So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David until the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations, and from the carrying away into Babylon into Christ are 14 generations.
Okay, so what's he saying? From Abraham to David there were what? 14. All right. From David to the exile to Babylon was how many? 14. And then from Babylon until the time of Christ was? 14. Okay, so 3 times 14 is what?
42.
42. All right, so let's look at what goes on here. Let's take the very first one where he starts talking about from Abraham to David, which is found in verses number 2 to verse number 6. Okay? He starts out with Abraham fathered who? Isaac. So Abraham is number 1. Isaac fathered Jacob. So that makes Isaac number 2. Jacob fathered Judah and his brothers, so Jacob is number what? 3. So then he fathered Judah. So Judah fathered Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Okay? So Judah is what? Okay, Judah is 3. Perez is what? So Judah is 3. That makes Perez, because Perez is the one that's going to be named in the next one. So Perez makes how many? 4. Perez fathered Hezron, so that makes what? 5. Hezron fathered Aram, which makes that 6. And then Aram fathered Aminadab. That makes 7, right? Aminadab fathered Nahshon, and so Nahshon makes what? 8. Nahshon fathered, I want to say salmon, because I'm hungry. And that makes that what? 9. And then Salmon fathered Boaz, right? That makes Boaz number 10. Boaz fathered Obed, and that makes that what? 11. Okay. Then Obed fathered who? Jesse. That doesn't make 14.
No,
That makes how many?
12.
Okay, 12. All right, so let's,
With Jesse the father of King David, wasn't it?
okay.
Or you talking about before or including him?
I'll show you the problem. So they look at this and they say, hold on. That's 12, right? Okay, so there's that one. So now let's go from David to the Babylon in exile. Okay, now it says David fathered who? Solomon. Solomon fathered Rehoboam. That makes how many? 2. Solomon 1, Rehoboam 2. Rehoboam fathered Abijah, which makes that 3. Abijah fathered Asa. That's Asa makes 4. Asa fathered Jehoshaphat. That's where we get jumping Jehoshaphat. He liked to leap a lot. So he's number 5. And then Jehoshaphat fathered Joram. That makes that what? 6. Okay. Joram fathered Uzziah. So Uzziah makes what? 7. Uzziah fathered Jotham, right? So Jotham now becomes what? 8. Jotham fathered Ahaz. That makes Ahaz what? 9. Ahaz fathered Hezekiah. 10. Hezekiah fathered Manasseh. That's 11. Manasseh was Amon. And then Amon fathered Josiah. Right? So now you have 13, okay? And then it'll go on and say, and Josiah fathered Jehoiakim and his brothers at the exile of the Babylon. So now I've got 12, and now I've got 13. Now let's go from the exile to the Messiah. Jehoiakim fathered Shealtiel, which was 1. Shealtiel fathered Zerubbabel, which makes him number 2. Zerubbabel fathered Abihud. I don't know why they name these kids this, man. This is crazy. Aham fathered Elikam. That's 4. Elikam fathered Azor. 5. Azor fathered Zadok. Zadok fathered Achim. And Achim fathered Eloid was Eleazar. Eleazar fathered Methan. Okay. And then Nathan fathered Jacob. 11. Jacob fathered Joseph. Right? And then it says, and then Jacob fathered Joseph, the husband of Mary, who gave birth to Jesus, who is called the Messiah. So how many does that make? 13. So none of these measured out to 14. And he said, okay, so let's do this. So when you look at this, it really is, and they'll do these stuff, and it's really stupid. Because you look at this, it says from Abraham to David. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was what? What did we say? Abraham fathered Isaac, and so that made that what? One. No, it made it two. It made it two. It made it two. Because you got to include Abraham. And then when you come down here and Jesse fathered David, that means you've got Abraham and David, which are not counted in there if you're going that way. And so now you've got 14. Okay, so you begin to look at that, okay? So now you come from David to the Babylonian exile, okay? And so where does it start again? It starts again with David. And we didn't count David. We started with Solomon as being number one. So now you have David added in there, and we had 13 in that group. You add David to that, that makes what? Here we go. Now we begin to start looking at this. Now the last one comes from after the exile of Babylon to the birth of Christ. Now what happened is, look at this. It said, then after the exile of Babylon, Jehoiakim fathered Shealtiel. Okay? And what happens is, we didn't count Jehoiakim in the previous one. So Jehoiakim actually is the one who starts the first one. So if you add those 13 all the way up to Jesus, you add in Jehoiakim. So what does it make? So what did Matthew say? From the time of Abraham to David, there were 14 generations. From the time of David to the Babylonian exile, there were 14 generations. From the time of the exile to the coming of Jesus, there were what? 14. He didn't lie. And he does know how to count. And so sometimes what happens is that we begin to look, Matthew was absolutely accurate when he said 14 generations. Not bad at math. He was accurate when he said there were 14 generations. It depends on how you count them. And the problem is, what we generally want to do is we don't want to include the first one in the count. But it has to go from there. He says from the time of David, because David would be the first generation. The second generation, it's like, for instance, if you go out and you take a generational picture and you say, I'm going to take a generational picture and I got 3 generations in that picture. Generally, who do you have in that picture if it's a 3 generation?
Your grandma, your mother, and you.
You got your grandmother. You got your grandmother, you, and your child. Right?
I got all of us.
So, hold on a minute. How do you get that? Because if you don't count your grandmother, it's just you and your grandchild, then that's only a 2 generation. So you have to count the one who started it, because that is a generation. And this is what Matthew did. Matthew started it, and he started his count from the one who started it. Okay? Not from the one who came in after that generation and said, okay, now it's only a 13 generation and not including David or some of the others that are there. And so sometimes when you begin to look at these people and what they say, this is why I say to you sometimes, these people are nuts. You know, don't you have anything else better to do than to fall through these things and look at these things? Okay? All right. Let's go to Matthew chapter 13. And this one really deals with something kind of dear to what Jesus said. Okay. Now, read from verses 31 to 33, or just 31 and 32. We don't have to deal with 33.
He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it was the smallest of all your seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so the birds of the air come and perch in its branches.
Okay. Now, what did Jesus say about that mustard seed? That it was the least of all the seeds. That it basically was the smallest. And so what they've come back to do is a lot of people, scientists have come back and said, hold on a minute. Jesus was wrong. That there are seeds that are out there that are smaller than mustard seeds. And so therefore, he was incorrect in what he said when he said that this was the least of these. Okay? Now, when you begin to look at what Jesus was saying, he's not refuting science. And a lot of times in saying this, it's you've got to look. There is another seed, that the orchid seed. Okay, the orchid seed is smaller than a mustard seed. Do you know that? If you didn't, you do now. Okay. If you were to have an orchid seed and a mustard seed, the orchid seed would, if you could somehow measure it, you would find that the orchid seed is smaller than the mustard seed. But you have to also look at this. What did he say? It is, he started and he said, it's the smallest of all seeds. Who read it?
I do.
Okay, read it again.
Yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants.
Okay, the garden plants or herbs. So what he's doing is he's saying that the mustard seed is the smallest of the herbs or garden plants. He's not saying that it's the smallest seed in the whole world. That's not what he's saying. He's defining a group of seeds because he's talking to a specific group of people. These were people that were growers, planters of herbs and gardens. And what he was trying to define to them was basically, probably, if you were to look at where Jesus was probably standing and where he was probably talking to these people, I would grant to tell you that there was probably a bunch of mustard plants there or mustard trees there. And he was saying, okay, you've got these orchards here and you've got these plants in here. And the least of all of those seeds, if I had, back then, if I had an apple, maybe an apple tree and a pear tree and a peach tree and a mustard tree, he would say, now you take those four trees and you look at what is the least seed of all of the plants. And they would say, well, what's the mustard seed? Okay, but you tell me which grows to be the largest tree when it grows up. And he would say, no. He would say the mustard seed was. That mustard seed would grow so large that you could have basically the birds and the fowl of the air could come in there and nest in that thing, and you would never find them because it was so large and so big. Okay, you know, and so it was so large. Okay, and so what he was trying to talk. I don't have to go back there. I can do it this way. So what he's basically talking about is, okay, with all of these farmers, if all of these things that you planted, of all of those that you had for food that you planted, which one grows to be the biggest? And he would have said, you know, here it is. It's the mustard seed. Okay. Now, go to Mark chapter 4 in verse number 31.
It is like a grain of mustard seed, which when it is grown in the earth is less than all the seeds that be in the earth.
And go on to 32, I'm sorry.
But when it is sown, it groweth up and becometh greater than all herbs, and shooteth out great branches, so that the fowls of the air may lodge under the shadow of it.
So when we begin to look at this, what's he talking about? Again, he's talking about the garden herbs, you know, the things that we're doing there. And so what you need to understand is that what Jesus wasn't talking about all of the seeds in the whole earth. He's talking about a very specific type of seed. And he plays this because an orchid is not an herb, is it? What is an orchid? That's a flower. Now, you might want to eat an orchid if you want to. Some people do. They get high. There's a lot of people that get high on flowers, but I haven't heard anybody yet get high on a mustard seed or mustard plant. You know, my mom would always make mustards, but that's okay. 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 Now, remember when go to John chapter 8 in verses 3 through 31. 8, chapter 8, verses 3 to 11. I'm sorry. So, somebody got it? Want to read it?
Teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." We'll go 11. Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin."
All right. Somebody go to Leviticus chapter 20 and verse number 10.
The man that committed adultery with another man's wife, even he committed adultery with his neighbor's wife, and adulterers, and the adulterers, so surely he put to death.
Okay. Now, when you look at this, it said, here's what it says. It said that the leaders brought this woman and said, "Okay, your master, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery, in the very act. And the law states that she must be put to death." Okay? Now that was the law. And what some people will say, well, hold on, Jesus disobeyed the law. Because the law stated if a person was caught in adultery, they must be stoned to death. And when they came to Jesus, they said, okay, what does it teach? Now, there's a couple of things that you got to read. You read the one in Deuteronomy or Leviticus chapter 20 and 10. That verse says, the man who commits adultery with another man's wife, he who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Basically, number one, what it states is people are caught in adultery. It can't be adultery with just one person. There has to be two. The law states both parties must be stoned. Okay? So number one, who did they bring before Jesus?
Just a woman.
Just the woman. Okay? That's the first part of this equation. The second part of this equation is found in Deuteronomy chapter 19 and verse number 15.
It is not enough to convict anyone accused of any crime or offense they may have committed. The matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses.
All right. So, if somebody is going to be accused of a crime, they cannot be accused of a crime by just one witness. It must be at least 2 or 3. Okay? No less than 2. So, let's talk about what Jesus did. Number one, we asked the question, who did they bring before Jesus? The man and the woman? No. So therefore, they really weren't concerned about justice. They were concerned about tricking Jesus. Here's how Jesus turns the table on them. Okay? And still did not break any law. He did not go against any law. The law states that the adulterer and the adulteress both must be brought and stoned to death. Well, they didn't do that. They only brought the adulteress. The law also states that you've got to have 2 or 3 witnesses. When they asked Jesus a question, remember what he did? He stooped down. He didn't say a word. He stooped down and began to write. When he finished writing, he stood up, and what was there? Who was there? Just the woman. In order for her to be stoned, there had to be 2 witnesses. How many witnesses were left? None. He didn't disobey the law. He was not saying that adultery was correct. He was not going to stone the woman. There wasn't any witnesses. He was following the law. Remember what Jesus said? Jesus said, I did not come to do away with the law, but I came that the law might be fulfilled. These were some of the things that they were tricking Jesus with. But Jesus turned the table. Who knew the law better than anybody?
Really?
Jesus did. I know what the law states. I know what's there. I know that you've got to have 2 to 3 witnesses. Remember when they did this to Jesus and they brought him before Caiaphas? Okay? Here's what happened that sometimes when you look at what went on in the trials and you don't understand. What they did with Jesus, remember it said that they brought a lot of false witnesses? Okay. They could not convict Jesus until they had at least 2 people who agreed on the crime. Now, as soon as they have 2 people, now they can convict him. They brought witness after witness after witness after witness in there against Jesus, and they couldn't find 2 that would agree. And they kept bringing witnesses until they finally got 2. And then they could condemn Jesus for death. That's why the trial was going on for a long period of time. They were bringing in people left and right, left and right, left and right, but they couldn't get people to agree. Their stories weren't matching up. And they said, hold on, we can't convict this guy because we don't have two witnesses. Our law states, Jewish law states, two witnesses. And that's why they had to keep bringing more people in, and more people in, and more people in, and more people in, until they finally got two. And it took them a while to finally get two witnesses. So this same thing that, that Jesus was stating, you don't have any witnesses. I know the law. The law says you got to have two. So Jesus was not going against, when people tell you, hold on a minute, that lady had to be put to death. And Jesus was in the wrong by not having her stoned for adultery. No, he wasn't. He was not in the wrong. First of all, number one, where was the man? But Jesus never even addressed that issue, because Jesus knew what they were up to. And when Jesus wrote down, whatever he wrote down on the ground, it got rid of every one of those people. And there were no witnesses. So therefore, nobody could put that lady to death. Because if they had stoned her illegally, okay, they could have put them to death. Because they committed murder of that woman. Okay? Even though they were saying that it was legal, it was totally illegal. What they were doing here. Okay, so let me give you one more. All right, so here's one. And this is one that really they'll talk about. Go with me, if you would, to John chapter 3 and verse number 16.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life.
So when you become a Christian, you become part of the family of God, right? And he calls you what? Child, or he calls you sons of God. We say sons or daughters, but in actuality it's called son. So here's what some people will say to you. Hold on a minute. What did John 3:16 say? What did John 3:16 say?
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son.
Oh, he gave his only Son. So hold on a minute. How can you be a son of God if he's only got one son? Oh, yeah. And there are other places in the Bible where the angels are called the sons of God. So how can God only, John 3:16 says, he only Son of God. Then hold on, then the Bible is a contradiction. Because in the Bible, it talks about the sons of God being angels and also us. Okay? So when you begin to understand this, you begin to see some things. Because let me give you the verses, okay? In Matthew chapter 8:29, and you guys can read these things, okay? Because I have to get out of here. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 29, it says, "What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? You Son of God. Have you come here to torment us before our time?" Okay? Matthew chapter 14, in verse number 33, "Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, 'You truly are the Son of God.'" Matthew 26, 62 to 64, it says, "Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Okay? And so it begins to see this. But when you go into Luke chapter 3 and verse number 38, there it calls Adam the Son of God. Luke chapter 3 verse 38, it calls Adam the Son, or the Son of God. In Job chapter 1 verse 6, Job chapter 2 verse 1, and Job chapter 38 in verse 7, it calls the angels the sons of God. Okay? In Matthew chapter 5 verse number 9, Romans chapter 8 verses 14 and 19, it calls believers the sons of God. So when you begin to see all of these things, okay, you begin to see these things. But when you begin to look at John 3:16, it says his only begotten Son. Okay, when he begins to talk, and you need to understand that when he talks about him, he talks about him as in a totally different light, in a different term. Okay, begotten Son of God. We are not begotten. Okay.
We're adopted.
Absolutely, we are adopted. And here's the reason why, when you understand this. Who is the Father of Jesus?
God.
God. Who is our Father?
God.
No. In our own humanistic or human life, each and every one of us have a different Father, right? But we are now adopted into the family of God. And so therefore, we become his sons through adoption. We aren't begotten, we're adopted. Okay? So it's in the light of two different ways. Now, in the process of the angels, okay, the angels, they don't come about by any type of a procreation. The angels were just created. And so when you talk about someone creating, like an artist, okay, that creates a masterpiece of some way, whether it be an art piece that is a painting or a sculpture or something else, you'll hear them say a lot of times, well, that's my baby. That's my creation. That's my son, or that's my daughter. And so that's in the terminology of talking about the angels, he's talking of that in the sons as a creation, not in a sexual tone, okay, but rather in, I molded them with my hands, I formed them, I did this. And so this, when you start seeing it, it's not talking. It talks in three different ways, in three different terminologies, but still using the same word. Okay? So when they do this to you, it's not a contradiction. They just don't know what they're talking about. Okay? And now you do. So now, when these people start doing this stuff to you, when people start doing this stuff to you, then you can say, hold on a minute, let's talk. And you can act like you know what you're talking about.
Hello, this is Pastor Chuck Cotton from Calvary Baptist Church. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for taking the time out to either listen to our sermon or to watch it on video. We are grateful that you've actually taken the time, and hope and pray that it has been a blessing to you as it was to us as we delivered it to our congregation. We ask if you have any questions whatsoever that you email us at pastorchuck@calvarybaptistmiddletown.org. Or you could come in and give us a phone call, if you would please, at area code 513-423-7251. I'd like to take this opportunity to also invite you to come to our church and visit us, if you would please. We actually have small groups on Sunday morning starting at 9:30, with our morning worship following at 10:45. prior to our morning small groups, we also provide donuts with coffee, milk, orange juice, a time for fellowship, get to know each other, have a good time before we actually break out into our small groups for Sunday. Our worship services are uplifting, they're fast moving, and everything in our service is just a fast pace. But we do take time every once in a while to slow down as we feel the Holy Spirit moving, and we never want to hinder it in any way. We also have on Sunday evening, during the school year, we have Awana, and Awana starts with the Puggles, actually from age 2 all the way up through high school. And during that period of time, we also have a worship service. Both of these start at 6 o'clock and end at 7:30. Our Wednesday night, we have a Bible study, which starts at 7. We generally finish about 8:15. We would love for you to come and visit with us. Don't have to dress up. Just come as you are, because to us, it doesn't matter. You're a child of God, a creation of His, and so to us, you're important to everything that we do. Our motto here is building the kingdom one life at a time, and we hope that we have a chance to visit with you, get to know you as you get to know us. So thank you, and may God bless you.